The first knock came so gently that I thought it was part of a dream I hadn't fully woken up from yet. It was 2:17 in the morning. Later, I would confirm the time with a shaking thumb and the dim glow of my phone, but in that moment it was just darkness and silence pressing in on my old Volkswagen camper like a held breath. The desert had gone completely still. No wind, no distant engines, no coyotes singing to the moon, just the low, familiar hum of cooling metal and my own heartbeat slowing after sleep. Then tap, tap, tap. 3 slow knocks on the door. Not frantic, not aggressive, almost courteous. I lay there on the narrow bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling where the shadows of the curtains barely shifted. My first thought wasn't fear. It was confusion. Who knocks like that in the middle of the Black Rock Desert? This wasn't a campground with neighbors 10 feet away. I was 30 miles from the nearest paved road, parked on cracked playa that stretched flat and endless in every direction. My name is Evan Calder, 42 years old, born and raised in Oregon, and I've been RV camping for most of my adult life. That little Volkswagen, sun-faded blue, pop top that groaned when it opened, had been my companion through ghost towns, Forest Service roads, salt flats, and stretches of America most people only ever see on satellite images. I prided myself on being prepared, extra water, emergency radio, flares, a sidearm locked in a steel box under the passenger seat. I didn't scare easily, and I didn't panic over noises in the night. Animals made sounds, wind played tricks, isolation messed with your head. That's what I told myself as I listened. Silence returned, thick and complete. I waited for footsteps, for the crunch of boots on alkali dust, for a cough, a voice, anything human. Nothing came. I sat up slowly, joints stiff from the cold, and leaned toward the front window. The desert outside was washed in moonlight, pale and empty. No headlights, no silhouettes, no movement. Just my own reflection faintly staring back at me through the glass. I remember thinking how strange it was that whoever had knocked hadn't said a word. Not hello, not sorry to bother you. Not even a desperate call for help. Just 3 knocks. I stayed awake for another hour after that, nerves buzzing under my skin, listening for any sign that someone or something was still out there. Eventually exhaustion won, and sleep dragged me under. I wish it hadn't. The second night, the knocking came again. Same time. 2:17 a.m. This time I was already half awake when it happened, as if some part of me had been waiting for it. The taps sounded identical, same rhythm, same pressure, not louder, not softer, as if whoever was outside had practiced. Tap, tap, tap. My stomach tightened. Patterns don't happen by accident out there. The desert is chaotic by nature. Animals don't keep schedules. Wind doesn't knock politely. I didn't move right away. I focused on my breathing, listening for any other sound layered beneath the knocking. I caught something faint then. A dry, almost electrical smell drifting through the RV, like overheated wiring or static in the air. It hadn't been there before. Get a grip, I whispered to myself, my voice sounding too loud in the small space. I reached for the flashlight mounted above the sink and clicked it on, sweeping the beam across the windows. Still nothing. No tracks in the dust that I could see from this angle, no shadows retreating. The knock didn't repeat that night. That should have reassured me. Instead, it felt like a warning. During the day, the Black Rock Desert looked harmless enough. Vast, blindingly white under the sun, mountains shimmering on the horizon like mirages. I spent the morning checking the perimeter of my campsite. No footprints. No tire tracks that weren't my own. The playa's surface was undisturbed, as if no one had walked near my van in weeks. I told myself the first knock could have been thermal contraction, metal popping as temperatures dropped. The second, coincidence. The human mind craves meaning where there may be none. Still, I repositioned the van slightly, turning it so the door faced a different direction. I cleaned the windows inside and out, scrubbing away dust until the glass was clear. I even laughed at myself a little while I did it. By nightfall, that laughter felt forced. The third night, the desert felt different before the knocking even started. The air was heavier, colder, carrying that same faint electrical smell. My skin prickled, as if charged. I lay awake, staring at the clock on my phone, watching the minutes crawl toward a time I didn't want to reach. 2:16. I held my breath. 2:17. Tap, tap, tap. My heart slammed so hard it made me dizzy. The sound seemed closer this time, not louder, but somehow more present, as if the door itself was listening along with me. I slid out of bed and crept forward, every movement deliberate. When I pressed my eye to the peephole, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. There was no one there, no outline, no shifting shape, just empty desert and moonlight. That was when I noticed something else. On the inside of the door, on the glass I had cleaned that very morning, were faint, cloudy impressions. 5 distinct smudges, elongated slightly like fingers pressed too hard against the surface, from the inside. I stared at them, my mind struggling to form a rational explanation. My hands trembled as I raised them, comparing their size to the prints. They didn't match. They were longer, thinner. The spacing was wrong. I hadn't touched that glass since cleaning it. A wave of panic rose in my chest, sharp and sudden. I wiped at the marks with my sleeve. They didn't smear the way dust should. They faded slowly, reluctantly, like condensation evaporating. Behind me, something shifted. A sound, not a knock this time, but a subtle pressure change, like the air inside the RV being displaced. And then, right next to my ear, came a whisper-soft sound. Not a voice. A breath. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the cramped interior, heart racing so hard it hurt. The RV was empty. Everything was exactly where it should be. No open cabinets, no movement, no explanation. The knocking didn't come again that night, but sleep never did either. By dawn, I had made a decision I didn't want to admit to myself yet. I couldn't leave, not immediately. Some stubborn part of me needed answers, needed to understand what was happening before I ran from it. As the sun rose over the desert, burning away the cold and the shadows, I didn't notice the faint new marks appearing on the inside of the windows, one by one, until it was far too late. By mid-morning, the heat had returned with a vengeance, flattening the desert under a white, merciless sky, but the warmth did nothing to shake the cold that had settled inside me. I stood barefoot on the cracked playa, squinting at my Volkswagen from a few paces away, trying to see it as just a vehicle again. Metal, glass, rubber, something ordinary, something explainable. That's when I noticed the windows. Every pane, side, rear, windshield was fogged on the inside, as if someone had breathed against them repeatedly during the night. I hadn't cooked. I hadn't run water. The air out here was bone dry, the kind that stole moisture from your lungs. Condensation didn't just happen like that. I wiped one window with my palm. Under the fog were prints. Not full handprints this time. Just partial impressions, fingertips, dragged slightly downward, like whoever made them had been losing strength. Or slipping. They formed uneven rows, some overlapping others, all facing inward, all at different heights, as if whatever pressed against the glass had moved around the RV slowly, methodically. Studying it made my stomach churn. I checked the locks again, door, windows, pop-top latches, everything was secure. No scratches, no pry marks, no damage at all. The van hadn't been breached, and yet something had been close enough to leave its mark from inside. I forced myself to eat a protein bar, though it tasted like cardboard in my mouth. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept glancing at the horizon, half expecting to see someone watching me from a distance. The Black Rock Desert offers no cover. Anyone out there would be visible for miles. There was no one. I told myself I was projecting fear onto coincidence. Sleep deprivation does ugly things to perception. Isolation amplifies doubt. I had chosen this kind of camping because I liked being alone. But solitude has a way of turning against you when your mind starts filling the gaps. By afternoon, I decided I'd stay one more night. That decision came with a strange mix of dread and resolve. I didn't want to leave feeling chased. I wanted proof, something concrete I could point to later and say, this is what happened. So I prepared like I would for any other potential threat. I set up a small battery-powered motion sensor outside the RV, low to the ground near the door. I positioned my flashlight, knife, and keys within arm's reach. I even loaded the sidearm and slid the lockbox under the bed, open this time. I hated myself a little for that. Hated how quickly fear had stripped away my confidence. As the sun sank, the desert cooled rapidly. Shadows stretched, swallowing the distant mountains. That smell returned again, sharper now, ozone mixed with dust, like the air before a storm that never comes. Night fell. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting my breaths. Every creak of the van made my muscles tense. The motion sensor stayed silent. Hours passed. Then my phone vibrated. 2:16 a.m. I didn't look away from the door. The second the clock ticked over, the knocking came, but this time it wasn't polite. Tap, 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 tap. 5 knocks. Faster, insistent. The sound traveled through the metal frame and into my bones. My mouth went dry. I stayed still, listening for anything else. The motion sensor didn't trigger. No footsteps, no scraping of dust. The knocks stopped. A long, suffocating silence followed. Then the RV shifted, just slightly, like someone leaning their weight against it. The suspension creaked in protest. My heart slammed so hard I thought I might pass out. I scrambled to sit up, flashlight in hand, beam locked on the door. The handle moved, not violently, not yanked. It turned slowly, deliberately, testing the lock. I whispered, "Go away," though my voice sounded thin and useless. The handle released. A pause. Then a new sound began, one I hadn't heard before. Scratching. Long, dragging strokes along the side of the van, starting near the rear window and moving forward. Not sharp like claws, not frantic, almost exploratory, like fingers gliding over skin. I covered my mouth to keep from making a sound. My entire body buzzed with adrenaline. The scratching reached the door, lingered there, then slid upward toward the window. The glass darkened as something pressed against it from the outside. I couldn't see a face. Just a distortion, like heat shimmer, warping the reflection of the desert behind it. A shape without edges. The window creaked under the pressure. Then, slowly, the shape leaned closer. A single fingertip emerged from the blur and tapped the glass from the outside. Tap. I don't remember deciding to open the door. I remember standing there with my hand on the handle, heart screaming at me to stop, to run, to do anything else. But something deeper, anger maybe, or desperation pushed me forward. I needed it to be real, needed to see it. I yanked the door open. Cold air rushed in. The desert stood empty. No figure, no shadow, no movement. But there were prints on the glass now, clear as day. Handprints, full, defined, unmistakable, pressed against the window from the inside. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. The prints were fresh, slightly smeared, as if the hands had been there moments ago. 5 fingers. Long. Wrong. Behind me, the motion sensor chirped to life. I spun around just as the interior temperature dropped sharply, my breath fogging in front of my face. The smell intensified, burning my nose. I felt pressure again, like the air was thickening, compressing. Then the knocking resumed, not on the door, on the walls all around me. From inside the RV. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember slamming the door. I remember running, barefoot, heart pounding, lungs burning, across the open desert toward my driver's seat, every instinct screaming that whatever was with me did not need a door to reach me. The engine turned over on the first try. As the headlights cut through the darkness, I saw them. Footprints, not leading to the RV, leading away from it, from every direction. Hundreds of them, and none of them matched human feet. I floored the accelerator, tires kicking up dust as I tore across the playa, not stopping until the first hint of dawn bled into the sky. Even now, years later, I still wake up at 2:17 a.m., my heart racing, convinced I can hear it again, that quiet, patient knocking. I didn't stop driving until the sun was fully above the horizon, bleaching the desert into something that looked harmless again. I pulled over near a rise of blackened rock, killed the engine, and sat there with both hands locked on the steering wheel, chest heaving, waiting for my heartbeat to slow enough that I could think. It never really did. The silence afterward was worse than the noise had been. No knocking, no scratching, no pressure in the air. Just the sound of blood rushing in my ears and the soft ticking of the engine cooling down. I stepped out of the van on shaking legs and walked a slow circle around it, half expecting to find damage, dents, scratches, proof. There was nothing. No marks on the exterior, no footprints in the dust where I'd stopped. The playa here was as pristine as it had been the first day I arrived. Whatever had followed me, if it had followed me at all, left no sign it had ever existed. Inside the RV, though, the windows told a different story. The handprints were still there, clearer in daylight. Dozens of them now, layered over one another, some higher than my head, some low near the floor. They weren't smeared like panic marks. They were placed, pressed, as if something had stood inside my space and methodically touched every surface. I didn't clean them. I couldn't. I drove straight out of the Black Rock Desert that morning, abandoning the rest of the trip without a second thought. I didn't camp again for weeks. When I finally did, it was in a crowded state park with children riding bikes and campfires crackling late into the night. Even then, I slept lightly, waking at every sound, my eyes snapping open whenever the clock crept toward that time. 2:17 a.m., I tried to explain it away in the months that followed. Sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, stress layered on top of isolation. I read about desert phenomena, electrical charges in dry air, temperature shifts that cause metal to contract and expand. I wanted a label I could stick on the experience and tuck it neatly away. But none of those explanations accounted for the consistency, the timing, the pattern, the way the fear didn't fade once I left. Because I didn't just bring memories back with me. I brought the knocking. It started small, a soft sound at my apartment door late at night that turned out to be nothing. A neighbor shifting in the hallway, pipes in the walls. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that trauma has a way of replaying itself when it doesn't have closure. Then it happened somewhere else. I was staying in a friend's driveway one night, the Volkswagen parked beneath an oak tree, rain tapping lightly on the roof. I just started to relax again, started to believe the desert had been a closed chapter. At 2:17 a.m., 3 slow knocks echoed through the van, not on the door, on the glass. I didn't answer that time. I didn't move. I sat there in the dark until dawn, watching my breath fog the air, listening as the knocking repeated once more, then never again. That was when I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit before. Whatever had been in the Black Rock Desert hadn't been trying to get in. It had already been inside, not the van. Me. The desert doesn't behave like other places. It strips things down. Sound carries differently. Time stretches. Your thoughts get louder when there's nothing to interrupt them. Out there, you don't just confront the environment, you confront yourself. Every doubt, every buried instinct. Every warning you ignored because it didn't fit the version of reality you wanted. I'd felt it the first night. That subtle sense of being observed, of something waiting patiently while I rationalized it away. I'd been so determined to prove I wasn't afraid, to maintain control, that I dismissed the one thing that might have saved me sooner. My intuition. I've talked to other RV travelers since then. Quiet conversations, the kind people only have when they think you'll understand. A man who heard his name whispered outside his rig in the Utah Badlands. A woman who woke to the smell of burning hair in the Mojave with no source. A couple who found fingerprints on the ceiling of their trailer after camping alone near a dry lake bed. Different places, different stories, same pattern. Isolation, dismissal, a sign that comes softly before it comes loud. I don't camp alone in open desert anymore. I still travel. I still love the road, but I listen now to the way the air changes, to the feeling in my chest when something is wrong, even if I can't explain why. I don't wait for fear to justify itself, because some warnings don't shout. They knock, softly, politely, at the exact moment you're most willing to ignore them. And if you ever find yourself parked somewhere too quiet, too empty, watching the minutes tick toward a time that feels heavier than it should, if you hear 3 slow taps in the dead of night with no one outside to claim them, don't open the door. Don't argue with your instincts. Don't demand proof. Don't wait to understand. Start the engine. Leave. Because the most dangerous thing I learned in the Black Rock Desert wasn't that something out there wanted to scare me, it was that it was patient enough to wait until I stopped being afraid. The first knock didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a question I didn't want to answer. My name is Ethan Mercer. I was 38 years old then, born and raised in South Jersey, close enough to the Pine Barrens that the place felt familiar in the way a childhood scar feels familiar. You don't think about it until the weather changes, until something deep inside you starts aching for a reason you can't explain. I'd driven my old Volkswagen RV, cream-colored, boxy, stubborn as hell, into the Pine Barrens with my younger brother Luke for what we kept calling a reset trip. That was the lie we told ourselves. The truth was quieter. We were both running from things we didn't know how to name. For me, it was the constant pressure of responsibility, the sense that life had become a long hallway with no doors. For Luke, it was grief. Raw, unresolved, still breathing down his neck after a loss he refused to talk about. The ranger station sat at the edge of the campground like a tired sentinel. One fluorescent light buzzed overhead, attracting moths that threw themselves against it with soft, repetitive taps. Inside, the ranger was older, gray mustache, eyes that didn't quite meet mine. He flipped through paperwork slowly, deliberately, like time meant something different to him. "Most sites are open," he said, then paused. His finger hovered over the map. "Just don't take Site 13. Luke laughed before I could stop him, a sharp sound in a place that didn't invite humor. "Unlucky number, right?" The ranger didn't smile. He just slid the map toward us and circled the site with his pen anyway. "Hard. Too hard." "Doesn't matter what number you believe in," he said. "Some places remember things." I told myself it was theatrics. Pine Barrens had always carried that reputation. Stories of the Jersey Devil, whispers of people who wandered off trails and didn't come back. Folklore dressed up as caution. I nodded, thanked him, and as soon as we were outside, Luke nudged me. "Site 13 it is," he said. "Cheapest one left." That should have been the second warning. The drive-in felt wrong in a way I couldn't quantify. The road narrowed too quickly, trees pressing closer, their trunks thin and pale like bones. The GPS cut out 5 minutes before we arrived, the screen freezing before going black. The air smelled damp, metallic, like rain that never quite fell. When we pulled into Site 13, the forest seemed to swallow sound. Even the engine shutting off felt muted. It was already late when we settled in. The clearing was smaller than the others, ringed by scrub pines that leaned inward, their needles whispering even when there was no wind. The fire pit was cold, untouched. No tire tracks, no footprints. Luke didn't notice any of it. He was already unloading supplies, humming to himself, forcing normalcy like a shield. I stood there longer than I should have, keys still in my hand, listening. That was when I realized how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet. Expectant quiet. The kind that makes your ears strain, searching for proof that the world is still moving. Night came down fast. By 11, the darkness felt heavy, pressing against the RV windows like a held breath. We'd turned on the small interior lights, the yellow glow barely reaching the corners. I checked the locks twice, then told myself I was being ridiculous. At 11:48 p.m., the radio turned on by itself. It wasn't music. It wasn't static. It was a sharp, clipped tone, followed by a voice that sounded distant and hollow, like it was echoing through a tunnel that shouldn't exist. Ranger emergency code. I froze. Luke looked up from his phone, color draining from his face. The code repeated, slow and deliberate, followed by a sequence of numbers I didn't recognize but somehow felt wrong in my chest. The signal wavered, dipped, then cleared again. "This frequency is no longer monitored," the voice said. "If you are receiving this transmission, remain inside your vehicle. Do not acknowledge." The radio cut off. Silence slammed back into place. Luke laughed. Too loud, too fast. "Okay, that's not funny." I didn't answer. My hands were shaking. I reached for the radio dial, turned it off, then pulled the power cable out entirely. The display went dark. "Probably some old recording," I said, though my voice didn't believe me. "Residual signal or something." Luke nodded, but he kept glancing at the windows. That was when the knocking started. 3 slow knocks. Not loud, not aggressive, measured, as if whoever or whatever was outside understood patience. My first instinct was denial. Campers knock. Rangers knock. People get lost. The mind fills gaps with reason because the alternative costs too much. Stay here, I told Luke. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped toward the door, my heart beating so hard it made my vision pulse. When I opened it, the cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet pine and something else beneath it. Old, sour, like fabric left too long in a basement. He stood just beyond the reach of the porch light. A ranger uniform, dark green, clean, too clean. His hat shadowed his face, but I could see enough to know he wasn't breathing, not in the way people breathe. His chest didn't rise, his eyes didn't blink. The badge on his chest caught the light. The number had been scratched out, deep gouges, as if someone had tried to erase it with a knife. You need to leave, he said. His voice didn't match his face. It was younger, flat, recorded. I'm sorry? I said. You need to leave, he repeated. Site 13 is not occupied. I'm standing right here, I said, anger flaring up to cover the fear. We checked in. The ranger tilted his head just slightly. The movement was wrong, too smooth, like a puppet pulled by a careful hand. There are no records after 1989, he said. Do not acknowledge further contact. The porch light flickered. Behind me, Luke whispered my name. The knocking came again, louder this time, but not from the door, from the side of the RV, then the back, then the roof. One knock at a time, circling us, deliberate and patient like something counting. The ranger didn't move. He just stood there, staring past me, waiting for something I didn't understand. I slammed the door shut and locked it, every instinct screaming now. Panic flooded in, hot and immediate. The knocks continued, slow and rhythmic, mapping the RV's shape, learning us. Ethan, Luke said, his voice breaking. I think it knows we're here. The radio crackled. Even unplugged, the speaker hissed to life. This is your final warning, the voice said. Do not respond. Do not open the door. The knocking stopped, and in that sudden silence, I realized something worse. It was listening. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was pressure, like the forest itself had leaned in closer, waiting to see what we'd do next. Luke had backed himself into the far corner of the RV, knees pulled to his chest, eyes fixed on the radio like it might wake up again just to say his name. I stood in the narrow aisle, flashlight clenched in my fist, listening to my own breath scrape against my ribs. Every instinct told me not to move, not to speak, not to acknowledge anything outside those thin aluminum walls. Then the smell changed. At first it was faint, like old paper and rust, but it thickened fast, seeping in through the vents, crawling along the floor. It smelled occupied, like a place that had been shut for decades and suddenly opened again. My stomach turned. I remembered something my grandfather once said about the Pine Barrens. If the woods want you to notice them, they'll start with your nose. A soft scrape traced along the RV side. Not a knock, a drag. Slow. Curious. Luke squeezed his eyes shut. Please, he whispered, not to me. Please don't. The scrape moved to the back window. I could feel the vibration through the floor, subtle but intentional. Something was touching us, testing the boundary, learning where we were weakest. I tried to think logically. Rangers did patrol it nice. Old equipment malfunctioned. Animals brushed against vehicles. Bears, maybe. But the Pine Barrens didn't have bears that walked upright, that spoke in recorded warnings, that wore uniforms with erased identities. The flashlight beam shook as I aimed it at the front window. A face pressed against the glass. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. It was already there, revealed only when the light found it. Pale skin stretched too tight over bone, eyes wide, unblinking, breath reflecting the beam like wet stones. The mouth hung slightly open, lips cracked as if it had forgotten how to close them. It smiled. I staggered back, hitting the counter hard enough to rattle the cabinets. The face slid away from the glass, vanishing into the dark with a soft exhale that fogged the window long after it was gone. The radio crackled again. You have acknowledged, the voice said, calmer now, almost kind. Procedure has changed. No, I said aloud before I could stop myself. Luke's head snapped up. Ethan, don't talk to it. Too late. The knocking resumed. Faster now. No longer patient. No longer polite. It came from everywhere at once. A chaotic rhythm that rattled screws loose and made the cabinets shake. The RV felt smaller by the second, shrinking around us like a clenched fist. I moved on instinct, grabbing the keys from the hook by the door. My hands fumbled, sweat slicking my grip. We're leaving, I said. Right now. Luke didn't argue. He scrambled up, nearly slipping as the floor vibrated beneath us. I threw myself into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and turned. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered, then died. Again. The engine coughed once, weak and hollow, like a dying animal, then fell silent. Outside, the knocking stopped. A voice replaced it. Vehicle departure is not advised, it said. Not from the radio this time, but from everywhere. From the trees. From the ground beneath us. From inside my skull. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel. Start, I hissed. Come on, come on. The headlights flashed on suddenly, illuminating the clearing in harsh white light. The Ranger stood directly in front of us, closer now. Close enough that I could see the stitching on his uniform, the dirt ground into the fabric as if it had been worn underground. His face was clearer too, younger than I'd expected, with a jawline that suggested someone who'd once smiled easily. His eyes were empty. He raised one hand and pointed. Not at me, but at Luke. Unresolved occupants must remain, he said. Luke let out a sound I'd never heard from him before, a raw, animal sob. He shook his head violently. I didn't mean to, he said. I didn't know. What is he talking about? I shouted. The Ranger's head turned toward me, slow and deliberate. Site 13 records emotional residue, he said. Grief attracts attention. The words hit like ice water. Luke collapsed into the passenger seat, hands over his face. I thought if I left, he choked, if I got far enough away, it would stop following me. The air inside the RV dropped in temperature so fast my breath fogged. Something moved behind the Ranger, not stepping forward, unfolding out of the darkness like a shadow remembering it had weight. Tall, wrongly proportioned. Its shape shifted depending on where I looked, like my eyes couldn't agree on what it was allowed to be. The Ranger stepped aside. You may exit the site, he said, but only if balance is restored. No, I said again, louder, angrier. You don't get to decide that. The thing behind him tilted its head, mirroring his earlier motion. A low sound rolled out of it, not quite a growl, not quite a voice. The smell intensified, thick and suffocating. Luke looked at me then, eyes red, desperate. It was my fault, he said. The accident. I drove. I fell asleep. I never said it out loud. The knocking returned, inside my chest this time, my heart slamming so hard it hurt. I understood then, in the worst possible way. This place didn't hunt bodies. It hunted what people tried to bury. I grabbed Luke's arm. Listen to me, I said, forcing my voice steady. You don't owe this place anything. You hear me? The Ranger's expression twitched, just for a second, like interference. Confession acknowledged. The voice boomed. Procedure nearing completion. The thing behind him began to move forward. I did the only thing I could think of. I leaned out the driver's side window and screamed. Not at them, but into the trees. I said my own fears out loud. My exhaustion, my resentment, the guilt I carried for leaving people behind when they needed me. I poured it out, raw and unfiltered, my voice cracking, my throat burning. The forest responded, not with sound, but with released. The pressure eased. The headlights stopped flickering. The thing hesitated, its shape blurring, edges fraying like smoke and wind. The Ranger looked down at his badge, at the scratched-out number. For the first time, he blinked. Site 13, he said quietly, almost sadly, is now vacant. The engine roared to life. I didn't wait. I hit the gas, swerved around the Ranger as he faded backward into the dark, and tore down the narrow road, branches scraping the sides, mirrors snapping inward. The trees seemed to recoil as we passed, the road stretching out ahead of us like it had been holding its breath. We didn't stop driving until dawn. When we finally pulled over, miles from the Pine Barrens, the radio turned on one last time. No codes, no warnings, just silence. Luke slept for hours. I didn't. Because even now, years later, sometimes late at night, I hear it again. 3 slow knocks. Not on the door, but on the inside. The knocks didn't follow a schedule. That was the worst part. They didn't come every night or even every week. They came when I was tired enough to forget myself, when the world felt quiet enough that my guard slipped. 3 slow taps, spaced just far enough apart to make me question whether I'd imagined the first 2. Always from inside, from the ribs, from the place where memory stores its unfinished business. Luke and I never talked about Pine Barrens again. Not directly. We drove back south in silence, the Volkswagen humming beneath us like it was grateful to be moving, like it wanted distance just as badly as we did. When we finally stopped for gas, sunlight spilling across cracked asphalt, everything looked normal enough to make the night feel unreal. That almost broke me more than the fear had. Luke moved out west a month later. Said he needed space, said the air felt different there. I didn't argue. Some wounds heal better when the geography changes. We still talk, but there are subjects we both step around like loose floorboards we don't trust anymore. As for me, I kept the RV. That might sound like denial or stubbornness or some misplaced attempt at control, but the truth is simpler. I needed to know whether fear had taken something permanent from me or whether I could still sit behind that wheel and feel like myself. So I kept traveling. Different campgrounds, different states, different weather. I stayed away from places with reputations, away from numbered sites that people whispered about. I followed the rules. I listened when rangers warned me. I learned the subtle language of the land, the way birds go quiet before something shifts, the way wind changes pitch when it's not alone. And slowly, the knocks faded. Not gone, just quieter. Until one night in early October, parked off a Forest Service road in western Pennsylvania, when the temperature dropped faster than it should have. I was alone that time, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the soft tick of the engine cooling down, the smell of leaves and damp earth pressed in through the cracked window. 3 knocks. Measured. Familiar. I closed my eyes. The old version of me, the one from Pine Barrens, would have frozen, would have counted seconds, would have begged for it to stop. Instead, I breathed. I sat up, feet on the floor, and acknowledged the fear without feeding it. I didn't speak to the knocking. I didn't challenge it. I simply stayed present. Anchored, honest. The knocks came again, softer this time. Then they stopped. That was when I understood the lesson Site 13 carved into me, deeper than any scar. Some places don't want your body. They want your silence. They want the things you refuse to say, the grief you pack away, the guilt you lock behind polite smiles and forward motion. They wait patiently because they know most people will eventually need somewhere quiet enough for the truth to catch up with them. The Pine Barrens didn't create our fear. It amplified what we carried in with us. That ranger, whatever he was, wasn't guarding the forest. He was guarding a process, a reckoning, a boundary between denial and release. The scratched-out badge wasn't a threat, it was a warning. Identity dissolves when you ignore what defines you. I think about that sometimes when I pull into a campground at dusk, when the trees start to close ranks, and the air shifts just enough to make my shoulders tense. I think about how easy it is to laugh off warnings, to treat unease like superstition instead of instinct. And I think about Site 13. Because here's the truth most horror stories leave out. We didn't escape because we were faster. We didn't escape because we were smarter. We escaped because we finally stopped running from ourselves. Fear feeds on avoidance. It grows teeth when you pretend it isn't there. But when you face it, when you name it, own it, and refuse to let it speak for you, it loses its shape. It becomes background noise, a memory instead of a master. I still camp. I still park my Volkswagen under wide skies and falling leaves. I still wake up to strange sounds and unfamiliar shadows. But now, when the night presses close and the woods feel like they're listening, I don't shrink. I listen back. And if something knocks, whether from the door, the trees, or deep inside my chest, I ask myself one question before I respond. What truth is trying to be heard? Because the knocking never really stops. It just waits for you to be ready. The first thing I remember is the sound. Not loud, not sudden, but like the forest itself had learned how to walk. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I was 38 years old when this happened. Born and raised in Tacoma, Washington. Someone who had spent his whole life believing that if you respected the woods would respect you back. I'd camped more nights than I could count. Slept through storms. Bears passing close enough to hear their breath. Branches scraping the RV like fingernails. None of that ever scared me. What scared me that night wasn't what I could see. It was the feeling that something had noticed us and decided not to leave. It was supposed to be an easy trip, just me and my wife, Marissa, a short escape before winter fully closed in. Olympic National Forest had always felt ancient in a comforting way, like an old guardian standing watch. The trees there don't just grow, they loom. Moss hangs from the branches like curtains that never fully open, and even during the day the light struggles to find the ground. Still, we chose a quiet pull-off campground, no hookups, no cell signal, nothing but the sound of wind and distant water. That isolation was the point. We arrived just before dusk. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of rot and pine sap, and the temperature dropped faster than expected. I remember feeling it in my hands while leveling the RV, metal biting into my palms, colder than it should have been. Marissa joked about the forest feeling too quiet, but we both laughed it off. Forests are quiet. That's why people come. Inside the RV, everything felt normal. Too normal. The hum of the fridge, the soft clink of dishes, the familiar tight space that always made us feel safe because it was ours. When night finally settled, it didn't arrive gently. It pressed down. The darkness outside the windows wasn't empty. It felt thick, layered, like something you could lean against and feel it lean back. At exactly 1:03 a.m., I woke up. No dream, no gradual stirring, just awake. Heart already racing, like my body had heard something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. The RV was still, light, but the silence had changed. It wasn't absence of sound anymore. It was waiting. Then I heard it. A footstep. Slow, heavy, close enough that the ground vibration traveled through the RV's frame and into the mattress. Whoever, or whatever it was, didn't rush, didn't shuffle. It placed its weight carefully as if it knew exactly where it was stepping. Marissa shifted beside me. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Another step, then another, circling. I reached for the flashlight, my fingers clumsy, suddenly unsure of their strength. I didn't look outside right away. Part of me was already building excuses. Deer, elk, a ranger doing a late patrol. Anything that didn't require me to accept how intentional those steps sounded. The beam of light hit the window first. Nothing. Just our own reflections staring back, two pale faces floating in the dark. The footsteps continued, slow and steady, completing a full circle around the RV. Gravel crunched. Twigs snapped. Whoever it was stopped directly behind us. The smell came next. Wet earth. Thick and sharp, like freshly turned soil mixed with something sour. It slipped through the seams of the RV, subtle at first, then undeniable. My stomach tightened. That smell didn't belong to deer or elk. Minutes stretched. The footsteps resumed. Closer now, slower, like they were being measured. My mind fought itself, logic clawing against instinct. I told myself not to overreact. I told myself fear makes patterns where there are none. But my body wasn't listening. At some point, maybe an hour later, maybe more, the steps stopped, not faded, not retreated, stopped. The silence afterward was worse. It felt wrong, like holding your breath too long and realizing you might not be able to inhale again. Marissa gripped my arm so tightly her nails left crescents in my skin. Neither of us spoke. Speaking felt dangerous and like acknowledging it would invite whatever was outside to respond. Then came the knocking. Not on the door, on the side of the RV. One knock. Deep. Hollow. It wasn't testing. It wasn't curious. It was patient. I don't remember deciding to start the engine. I just remember my hands moving, muscle memory overriding thought. The headlights cut through the trees, slicing shadows into pieces. For a split second, something moved just beyond the beam. Tall, too tall, melting back into darkness before my brain could name it. The RV lurched forward, tires spinning briefly in damp gravel before catching. Relief surged through me so fast it almost made me dizzy. And then, running. Footsteps again, faster now. Not panicked, matching our pace. At 30 miles per hour, I told myself it was impossible. At 40, ridiculous. At 50, my rational mind should have won. It didn't, because the sound stayed with us. A heavy, rhythmic thudding, not fading, not falling behind, not on the road, around us. Like it wasn't chasing the RV, but traveling with it, just outside the frame of what headlights could reveal. Marissa sobbed quietly, covering her mouth, afraid the sound of her fear would make it closer. The forest blurred into streaks of black and gray, branches arching overhead like ribs. I didn't slow down until the sky began to lighten, a weak gray bleeding into the darkness. When we finally stopped at a gas station just outside the forest boundary, the silence returned, but this time it followed us out. People were around, normal people. Coffee cups, engines idling, life continuing like nothing had happened. I stepped out of the RV, legs shaking, lungs burning as if I'd been running instead of driving. That's when I saw the mud, thick, dark smears along the roofline. Handprints, not clear enough to count fingers but shaped wrong somehow, stretched. My throat closed. I didn't tell Marissa. I didn't want to see her break. We drove home in silence. That night, back in our own driveway, under the safety of porch lights and familiar walls, I believed it was over. I believed distance mattered. I believed the forest kept its secrets to itself. Until Marissa screamed. I ran into the bedroom and followed her shaking finger upward. On the ceiling, directly above our bed, were muddy footprints. Fresh, wet, pressed into the paint like the ceiling had been the ground. And something inside me understood, with cold clarity, that whatever had walked around our RV that night hadn't followed the road. It had followed us. The scream didn't echo the way screams usually do in movies. It collapsed inward, like Marissa's lungs had decided air was a mistake. Her finger stayed locked on the ceiling, shaking so hard it rattled the lamp on the nightstand. And when I finally forced myself to look up again, I felt something in me loosen, like a knot being pulled free too fast. The footprints weren't smeared. They were defined. Heel, arch, toes, pressed into the ceiling paint as if gravity had made an exception just once and then corrected itself. Mud still glistened, wet enough that a drop slid down and splashed onto the bedsheet between us. The smell hit me next. That same forest smell, wet soil, rot, something old and turned over. It didn't belong in our house. Our home smelled like laundry detergent and wood polish and the faint citrus cleaner Marissa liked. This smell pushed against that familiarity. Wet swallowed it whole. I told her it was probably condensation. I don't know why I said that. I didn't believe it, and neither did she. But denial is a reflex. You don't choose it. It chooses you when the truth feels too heavy to lift. I wiped the footprints with a towel. The mud came off easily. Too easily, like it wanted to be forgotten. The paint underneath was intact, no cracks, no damage, just clean ceiling again, too clean. We didn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The refrigerator clicking on made us flinch. Pipes settling sounded like movement. When the wind brushed the siding, I felt it in my teeth. At 3:17 a.m., I heard it. Footsteps. Not outside. Above us. Slow. Deliberate. Crossing the ceiling from one end of the house to the other. I sat up so fast my vision blurred. Marissa grabbed my arm again, same grip as in the RV, nails digging into skin like anchors. The footsteps paused directly over the bed. The ceiling creaked, not with strain, but with weight shifting, something pressed down. Not enough to break through, just enough to let us know it could. My rational mind tried one last stand. House settling. Old beams, stress, lack of sleep, but none of those explanations accounted for the way the air felt heavier, thicker, like breathing through damp cloth. None explained the smell intensifying, seeping into my sinuses, coating my tongue. Then came the tapping. 1, 2, 3, directly above my head. I don't remember getting the shotgun from the closet. I don't remember loading it. I remember standing in the hallway, barefoot on cold tile, aiming at a ceiling that looked exactly the same as it always had: white, boring, safe. I remember thinking how ridiculous it was to be afraid of drywall. The tapping moved, down the hallway, step by step, not rushing, not hiding, exploring. Marissa whispered my name, and I hated the fear in her voice more than anything else that night. It wasn't fear for herself. It was fear that I might do something irreversible. The footsteps stopped above the front door. The handle rattled once, twice, then nothing. Silence returned, but it felt different now, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. I didn't lower the gun. I didn't blink. Minutes passed, maybe hours. My arms burned, but I didn't move. At dawn, sunlight spilled through the windows, made warm and golden, painting everything normal again. Birds chirped. A car drove past. The world resumed. We didn't talk about leaving. We just packed. Driving felt wrong now, like motion had become an invitation. Every shadow in the rearview mirror felt intentional. Every bump in the road made my shoulders tense. I kept checking the speedometer, the mirrors, the sky, anywhere but inside myself where something had taken root. We checked into a motel 2 towns over. Bright lights, people everywhere, a place where nothing could follow unnoticed. That night I dreamed of running, not away from something, but with it, matching its pace, sharing its rhythm. When I woke up, my legs ached like I'd actually moved. Marissa was already awake, sitting upright, staring at the wall. "Do you hear that?" she asked. I listened, a faint sound, almost nothing, a slow, steady rhythm, footsteps somewhere above us. The motel manager said there were no rooms above ours. We left again. I didn't go back to work. I didn't answer calls. I avoided mirrors because I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked too closely, I'd see mud where my eyes should be. The forest felt closer now, even miles away, like distance no longer applied the way I understood it. On the 3rd night, Marissa broke. She said she felt watched, even with her eyes closed. She said it felt like something had learned the shape of her thoughts and was testing the edges. She said she could feel it when she tried to sleep, feel it waiting for her to let go. I held her and told her we'd be okay, but the words tasted false. Because deep down, beneath fear and logic and denial, I understood something I didn't want to accept. We hadn't been chased, we'd been chosen. Whatever it was didn't want the RV, didn't want the forest. It wanted proximity, familiarity, to be carried. That night, back home, I made a decision. One I still don't know was right. I opened every window, every door. I turned off every light. I stood in the living room and spoke out loud, voice steady despite the way my hands shook. I told it we didn't belong to it, that it couldn't stay, that it had mistaken curiosity for permission. The air shifted. The smell surged, then receded. Footsteps crossed the ceiling one last time, faster now, uneven, angry. Then silence, real silence. Weeks passed, months. The fear dulled, then faded. Life stitched itself back together slowly, imperfectly. But sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and my thoughts wander too far, I feel it again. That pressure, that sense of being noticed. And I remember something I learned too late. Some places don't end when you leave them. Some things don't follow your tracks, they follow your attention. The silence lasted longer than I expected. Not the fragile, nervous silence that makes you listen harder, but something deeper, like the house itself had exhaled and decided to keep breathing. Days passed without footsteps, without smells, without that oppressive sense of being leaned into by something unseen. I went back to work. Marissa slept through the night again. We laughed cautiously, like people testing ice after it cracks, and that's how it almost won, because fear doesn't always stay sharp. Sometimes it softens. Sometimes it convinces you that survival means the danger has passed. But I was wrong about one thing that still keeps me awake. Whatever followed us home didn't leave in anger. It left in patience. It started with small changes, things so ordinary they didn't register as threats. Doors left ajar when we were sure we'd closed them. Shoes turned the wrong direction in the hallway. the faintest smell of damp earth after rain, lingering just long enough for me to question whether it was memory or reality. Marissa noticed it too, but we didn't talk about it. Naming it felt like reopening a door we'd barely managed to shut. Instead, we tried to live louder. More music, more light, more people visiting, as if noise could override attention. But attention doesn't work that way. One night, months later, I woke up alone. Marissa's side of the bed was empty, sheets cold. Panic snapped me awake instantly, every nerve flaring like a tripwire. I called her name. No answer. The house felt wrong again, not quiet, but hollowed out. I followed the sound instead of fighting it, a soft rhythm, barely audible. A slow, deliberate movement coming from the living room ceiling. Each step landed with certainty, as if it knew I was listening now. I stood in the doorway and looked up. The ceiling fan was spinning slowly, casting shadows that crawled along the walls like insects. And there, just beyond the reach of the light, I saw it. Not clearly, never clearly, but enough, a distortion. A place where the ceiling dipped inward, like something was pressing against it from the other side. The paint flexed, the drywall breathed, and then Marissa screamed. The sound came from outside the house. I ran barefoot through the front door, lungs burning, heart hammering so hard it blurred my vision. She stood at the edge of the yard, frozen, staring up at the roof. Her face wasn't twisted in terror, it was emptied by it. "There are footprints," she said. "They're leading away." Muddy prints marked the shingles, crossing the roof in long, deliberate strides before disappearing over the edge into the darkness beyond our property. Not toward the woods, not toward the road, toward the open sky. That's when I understood the final truth. It had never been confined to the forest, never bound to the RV, never limited by walls or speed or distance. It learned by observing, it followed by adapting, and it stayed close, not because it was attached to us, but because it was studying what it meant to be human, how we moved, how we slept, how fear shaped our decisions. Some predators chase, others wait. We sold the house 3 weeks later. No explanation to the buyers, no disclosures that could capture what had happened anyway. How do you explain attention as a haunting? How do you warn someone that the danger isn't the place, it's the pattern? We moved inland, then south, then farther than we'd ever planned. I stopped camping, stopped trusting isolation. The open road, once freedom, became a vulnerability I couldn't ignore. Marissa changed too. She laughs less easily now, sleeps with the light on, sometimes wakes up already afraid, like her body remembers something her mind refuses to hold. As for me, I pay attention. Too much, maybe. I notice sounds others ignore, footsteps layered beneath traffic, rhythms hidden in rain, the way silence sometimes feels intentional, like it's listening back. And every so often, rare but enough, I smell it again. Wet earth, old rot, a forest that never forgot my name. I don't believe it's following us anymore. I believe it knows where we are. Because some encounters don't end in escape. They end in awareness. And once something has been truly seen, once it knows you can sense it, you don't need to be chased to be haunted. You just need to remember that somewhere out there, something learned how to walk by watching you do it. And it's still practicing, still patient, still listening for the moment you forget that the wilderness doesn't always stay where it belongs. The night I learned how thin the line is between warmth and terror began with the sound of a match flaring in the dark. My name is Ethan Cole, and at the time I was 38 years old, born and raised in the long, flat stretches of West Texas, where silence is something you grow up respecting. I'd been RV camping for nearly 15 years by then. Weekends, long routes, solo stretches meant to clear my head after a rough divorce and a job that kept me staring at screens more than skies. Camping was the one place I still trusted my instincts, the one place I believed I knew how to read what mattered. Or at least, that's what I told myself. That night, I was camped in Big Bend National Park, tucked into a primitive site not far from the Rio Grande, far enough from the main road that headlights never swept past. The sun had disappeared behind the Chisos Mountains hours earlier, leaving the desert to cool in that sudden, unnatural way it always does, like the land exhales all at once. By 9:30 p.m., the air had turned sharp, carrying the faint mineral smell of dust and stone. The sky was so clear it felt intrusive, stars watching with a patience that made me uneasy. I was alone, intentionally. I'd told myself I needed the quiet, that the vastness would settle something restless inside me. I'd parked my old Volkswagen camper at the edge of the clearing, angled so the rear doors faced the fire pit. The RV ticked softly as it cooled, metal contracting, a sound I'd heard 100 times before. Familiar, comforting, or so I thought. I built the fire slowly, deliberately. I always did. There's a rhythm to stacking wood that feels like prayer if you do it long enough. When the flames finally caught, they didn't roar. They whispered, low and steady, throwing light just far enough to keep the dark honest without pushing it back completely. I sat on a folding chair, hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug, listening to the desert settle. That was when I noticed the humming. At first, I thought it was the wind threading its way through the scrub. Big Bend has a way of making natural sounds feel intentional, almost directed. But this wasn't random. It had a pattern, a melody, soft, slow, and unmistakably human. I leaned forward, listening harder, my shoulders tightening without permission. The sound seemed to come from just beyond the firelight, somewhere at the edge of the clearing where the shadows pooled thick and unmoving. My first reaction wasn't fear, it was irritation. There are rules out here, unspoken but understood. You don't wander into someone else's sight at night. You don't make yourself known without announcing it. "Hello?" I called out, keeping my voice even. Calm. Reasonable. The humming didn't stop. The fire popped, sending a brief spray of sparks upward. For a moment, the light shifted, and that's when I saw her. She was sitting across the fire from me, close enough that the heat should have made her uncomfortable, yet she didn't move. I hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't heard fabric brush against gravel. One moment the space was empty, the next it wasn't. She was a woman, maybe mid-30s, though it was hard to tell. Her clothes were old-fashioned in a way that didn't feel intentional. Long skirt, dark blouse, sleeves buttoned at the wrists despite the heat. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, catching the firelight in dull strands. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes open and fixed on the flames. She was humming the same tune. Every instinct I had told me something was wrong, but I ignored it the way I'd ignored other instincts in my life, by reaching for logic. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she'd wandered from another site. People underestimate the desert at night all the time. "I didn't hear you walk up," I said, forcing a small laugh. "You okay?" She didn't blink. The humming softened, slowed, then stopped entirely, leaving the silence stretched thin and fragile. The fire cracked again, loud in the absence of sound. I noticed then that she wasn't casting much of a shadow, even with the flames between us. The light seemed to slide around her instead of landing. "Are you lost?" I asked. Her head tilted, just slightly, as if the question had to travel a long way before reaching her. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than breath, threaded with ash and smoke. "I died here." The words didn't land all at once. They settled in layers, each one heavier than the last. I waited for the punchline, the nervous laugh, the sign that this was some kind of sick joke. None came. She kept staring into the fire, her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's not funny," I said, though my voice had lost its steadiness. I felt suddenly aware of how alone we were, how far the nearest ranger station was, how small my circle of light really was. She turned her head then, slowly, deliberately, until her eyes met mine. They were pale, reflecting the fire in a way that made them look hollow. Still, she didn't blink. "The fire was louder back then," she whispered. "People said it sounded like singing." A chill crept up my spine, sharp and invasive. I stood, chair scraping loudly against the ground, the noise jarring in the stillness. "You need to leave," I said. "This is my site." For the first time, her gaze shifted, not to me, but to the flames. The humming started again, softer now, almost tender. The tune felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain, like it didn't belong to this century. The smell hit me next. Not smoke, something sweeter, cloying like burnt sugar and hair. My stomach tightened as memory surfaced uninvited. A news article I'd read years ago about a campsite accident, a woman caught in a flash fire when wind shifted unexpectedly. I'd skimmed it, shaken my head, moved on. "Ma'am," I said, louder now, "I'm serious. You can't be here." She leaned forward, and I saw then that her skin near the edges, her fingers, her jaw, looked wrong. Not injured, not scarred, just thin, like paper held too close to heat. "I never left," she said. "The fire went out instantly, not faded, not smothered. One moment it was there, alive and crackling, the next it was gone, leaving only darkness and the echo of her song hanging in the air. And in that sudden, absolute black, I realized I could no longer hear the desert at all." The darkness felt heavier than it should have, pressing in from every direction, thick enough that it seemed to have weight. I stood there frozen, my eyes useless, my ears straining for anything familiar. The crackle of dying embers, the hiss of wind through mesquite, even the distant bark of a coyote. There was nothing, just the faint continuation of her humming, floating somewhere in front of me, unanchored to space. I reached instinctively for the flashlight clipped to my belt. My fingers shook so badly I dropped it once, the plastic thudding softly against the dirt. When I finally managed to click it on, the beam cut a narrow tunnel through the dark, sweeping over the empty fire pit first. She was gone. No movement, no footsteps retreating, no outline fading back into shadow. The ground across from me was bare, undisturbed ash where the fire had been seconds before. The smell lingered, though, sweet, burned, intimate, clinging to the back of my throat. I told myself what I needed to hear. You imagined it. You're tired. The desert messes with people. I'd heard stories, told some myself. Isolation does strange things to the brain. Fear fills in gaps when silence gets too big. But my body didn't believe any of it. My skin prickled. Every nerve lit up as if warning me not to stay where I was. I backed toward the RV, flashlight swinging wildly now, illuminating scrub, rocks, the pale trunks of Ocotillo. Nothing moved. Still, the sense of being watched didn't fade. It sharpened. I reached the camper door, fumbling with the handle, and climbed inside, slamming it shut harder than I meant to. The sound echoed unnaturally loud like a gunshot in a canyon. I locked the door, then checked it twice, pressing my forehead briefly against the cool metal as I tried to slow my breathing. Inside, the RV felt smaller than it ever had. The familiar smells, old upholstery, dust, coffee grounds, were comforting but insufficient, like childhood memories that no longer protect you. I flipped on the interior light, half expecting to see her sitting at the small dinette, hands folded, eyes unblinking. The space was empty. I sat on the edge of the bed, flashlight still clenched in my hand, listening. The silence outside began to fray, little by little, until the desert sounds crept back in. Wind, insects, the low murmur of night reclaiming itself. It should have calmed me. Instead, it felt staged, like the world had resumed a script after an interruption. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time stretched, lost its edges. Then I heard it again, the humming. This time it wasn't outside, it was closer, too close. It seeped through the thin walls of the RV, vibrating faintly through the floor, the cabinets, the frame itself. The tune was clearer now, each note deliberate, patient. My chest tightened as recognition finally settled in. It was an old folk melody, one my grandmother used to hum when I was a kid. Something, she said, people sang around fires long before radios existed. I stood slowly, every movement careful, as if sudden motion might invite something worse. The humming seemed to circle the camper, drifting from one side to the other without footsteps to anchor it. When it reached the rear doors, it stopped. There was a knock. Soft, polite. 3 gentle taps, spaced evenly, like someone waiting to be invited in. "Ethan," a voice whispered. I hadn't told her my name. My throat closed. I backed away from the door, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack a rib. The rational part of my mind scrambled desperately, grasping at explanations. Maybe someone overheard me earlier at the visitor center, maybe a cruel prank, maybe... "Please." she said. It's cold. The temperature dropped noticeably, the air inside the RV turning sharp and stale. My breath fogged faintly, though moments earlier I'd been sweating. The windows clouded, condensation blooming across the glass in uneven patterns that looked disturbingly like fingerprints. Another knock. Louder this time. I burned, she whispered, the word dragging, heavy with memory. I just want to warm my hands. The smell surged back, stronger than before, flooding the camper until my eyes watered. I clamped a hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to retch. Images flashed unbidden, skin blistering, fabric catching, screams swallowed by flame. I thought of all the times I'd sat by a fire without respect, tossing logs carelessly, trusting the wind to behave. No, I said, the word cracking as it left me. You can't come in. Silence answered me. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe it was over, that whatever line I'd crossed had finally been redrawn. Then, the humming resumed, inside the RV. It came from beneath the floor, vibrating through the soles of my boots, through my bones. The cabinets rattled softly, dishes chiming together in a sound that felt obscene in its domestic normalcy. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied, casting shadows that bent where they shouldn't. I stumbled toward the front, grabbing my keys from the hook by the door. My plan was simple, desperate, and probably stupid. Start the engine, drive until dawn, don't look back. I yanked open the driver's door and climbed into the seat, slamming it shut behind me. The humming stopped. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, then died. I tried again, panic bleeding into anger, into pleading. The engine coughed once, a sick, hollow sound, then fell silent. In the windshield, reflected faintly in the glass, I saw her. She stood directly in front of the RV, close enough that the headlights should have illuminated her fully. They didn't. Her face hovered in that reflection, pale and serene, eyes fixed on mine. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, her song replaced by the soft roar of blood in my ears. The reflection shifted as she raised one hand and pressed it gently against the glass. The window frosted instantly beneath her touch, spiderweb cracks of ice radiating outward. I screamed then, the sound ripped from me raw and useless. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, on the brake, on anything, but the RV was dead, an inert shell, trapping me inside with whatever she was. Her lips curved into something like sadness. You stay when you shouldn't, she said, her voice suddenly inside my head, intimate and accusing. So did I. The pressure on the glass intensified, the frost thickening until I could barely see her. My chest burned, breath coming in shallow, frantic bursts. Somewhere deep beneath the fear, a realization surfaced. Not all hauntings are about malice. Some are about memory, about places that refuse to forget what we try to leave behind. I closed my eyes, hands shaking on the wheel. I'm sorry, I whispered, not knowing who I was apologizing to anymore. When I opened them again, the pressure was gone, the windshield was clear, the reflection empty. The engine roared to life without warning, jolting me forward. I didn't question it. I threw the RV into gear and drove, over rocks, over brush, over whatever lay in my path, until the campsite disappeared behind a bend and the road stretched out ahead of me, pale and merciful under the stars. I didn't stop until the sky began to lighten, the desert shifting from black to bruised purple. I pulled over near a ranger station, hands still trembling, and sat there until morning came fully, birdsong replacing the echoes in my head. Later, when I reported what happened, stumbling over the details, omitting the impossible parts, the ranger went quiet in a way that told me he'd heard something like it before. He pulled out an old binder, pages yellowed and soft with age, and showed me a record from years back. A woman, a fire accident. Same campsite. Witnesses reported hearing humming long after the flames were out. I left Big Bend that morning with a new understanding of what it means to listen, to places, to instincts, to the warnings whispered before fear has a shape. Some fires don't go out when the embers fade. Some songs linger, waiting for someone careless enough to sit and listen. And I've never built a campfire the same way since. I didn't sleep for 2 days after I left Big Bend. Not the kind of exhaustion where your body gives up, but the wired, brittle kind where every time you close your eyes, your mind replays moments you didn't fully understand when they were happening. The humming followed me, not as sound, but as a sensation like a pressure change inside my chest. I kept expecting to smell smoke where there was none, kept catching myself staring at reflections in windows a second too long. I told myself that once I got home, once I washed the desert dust off my boots and aired out the RV, things would settle back into place. That the fear belonged out there, in that campsite, under those stars. But fear doesn't respect geography. It travels light. 3 days later, I went online. I wasn't looking for validation. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just needed to know if the shape of what I experienced existed outside my own head. I searched for accident reports, archived ranger logs, old forum posts buried under layers of forgotten threads. Big Bend doesn't advertise its tragedies, but it doesn't hide them either if you know how to look. The record was real. A woman named Marisol Vega, 34 years old, solo camper, winter season several years back, wind shift. Fire spread faster than expected. By the time nearby campers realized something was wrong, it was already over. The report was clinical, detached, but one line stood out, buried in a witness statement. Several campers reported hearing a woman humming before the fire was noticed. Same song, same spot. I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling something heavy settle into my ribs. Not triumph, not relief, responsibility. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell campfire stories. The idea that places remember us more clearly than we remember them. That the land doesn't just hold our footsteps, but our mistakes, our final moments, our arrogance. I'd gone to Big Bend thinking I was a visitor, someone passing through. I left understanding that I'd been a guest in a place that already had a history, one I failed to listen to until it demanded my attention. For weeks afterward, I couldn't bring myself to light a fire. Even small ones, even controlled ones. I'd strike a match and feel my hand hesitate, an image flashing behind my eyes of flames going silent all at once. When I finally did sit by a fire again, it was different. I kept my distance. I watched the wind. I treated it like something alive instead of something owned. That experience changed how I camp, but more than that, it changed how I trust myself. I used to pride myself on being rational, on explaining things away, on staying calm when others panicked. That night taught me that calm can be another form of denial, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave, not investigate, not confront, not rationalize, just go. I think about her sometimes, Marisol, the woman by the campfire. I don't imagine her as angry anymore. I imagine her as unfinished, bound to a moment that no one warned her was coming. Repeating a song because it's the only thread she has left tying her to warmth instead of pain. And I think about how close I came to staying. That's the part that still chills me. Not the apparition, not the cold, not the voice saying impossible things. It's the version of me that almost pulled up a chair, almost kept talking, almost treated the warning as entertainment instead of truth. That's how people get lost in the desert. That's how they become stories someone else reads late at night, trying to convince themselves it couldn't happen to them. Big Bend is still one of the most beautiful places I've ever camped. That hasn't changed, but beauty doesn't mean safe, and silence doesn't mean empty. The land doesn't owe us comfort just because we seek it. If you ever find yourself alone at a campsite late at night, fire burning low, stars too bright to feel friendly, and you hear something that doesn't fit, something rhythmic, intentional, human, don't wait for proof. Don't ask questions that don't need answers. Trust the part of you that tightens before your mind catches up. Some lessons don't come as advice. They come as warnings whispered from across the fire by someone who stayed too long and paid for it. And if you're lucky, you get to leave carrying the fear instead of becoming it.